Hi, I'm Dr. Yasser, founder of Dentistry Mastered. I've built and run 8 dental practices generating over 7 million in annual revenue. Today, I earn over 60K a month as an associate dentist. I've mentored close to 100 associate dentists, helping them go from 10K to 30K a month. And I created this free course to show you what's needed to increase your income as an associate, not through more clinical training or working longer hours, but through strategic business decisions. And here's what I need from you. Put real effort into studying this. Take notes, do the exercises, implement what you learn. The associates who engage with this material see real results. The ones who just watch and do nothing, well, they stay stuck. So let's get started. Hello and welcome to Inspiring Dentists. This is a free course. It's the Fulfilled and Focused course. Basically, it's an essential guide for dentists in terms of how to organize their clinical work and how to get more fulfillment and financial rewards for the work that we do as dentists. And I've put this course together because I know how demanding dentistry can be. And it's really not just the clinical work. And although that's challenging enough, it's everything else that comes with it. It's the constant pressure, the relentless pace, that feeling that you're always juggling multiple things at once. And to be honest, I've felt this myself. And I've seen many dentists have that same feeling. So what I've tried to do here is create something that might help you take a step back and maybe reconnect with what originally drew you to this profession. Because I found that it's very easy to lose sight of that amidst all these daily pressures. Now, over the next 5 lectures, I'll be sharing some ideas that have helped me and many of our colleagues to get back to find purpose again, really, in what we do. And bear in mind, I'm not claiming to have all the answers here, but I will be sharing some practical approaches that may help your working day feel more manageable and hopefully also a bit more fulfilling, or a lot more fulfilling. Bear in mind, these concepts, they're not revolutionary. They're quite basic concepts and they have their roots in business management and operations management and human resources and how to deal with customers, how to deal with patients, etc. So let's get started. Now, the first question that I would like to pose to you is whether you are feeling the things that I'm gonna list here. Some dentists I found are very passionate about dentistry, but there is a sense of not being able to do enough. Many of them are nearly burnt out. We're working harder, but the income is not reflective of our harder work. And at times it's fluctuating. So we have days where, we hit, maybe thousands of dollars, pounds, euros, and days where we can hardly make $200, $300, $400 or pounds or euros. So that unpredictability is one part of what could be causing that stress. And I think many dentists would want a more predictable style of work. And that's achievable. It is achievable. Many of your colleagues, including myself, moved away from this unpredictability. And I'll be sharing my journey with you as well. Some of you are frustrated by practice limitations. The practice doesn't have the technological advancements that you are looking for. Maybe you want to be able to offer your patients a certain type of treatment, like Invisalign treatments, but you're limited because the practice doesn't offer you any technology to support your plans. Sometimes you find you have more than usual difficult patients, although I would like to challenge that notion, but we'll talk about that as well. And maybe there are some team issues as well in your practice. And the question then becomes, is it me or is it the team I'm working with? And where is the path forward? And is there a path forward? Many of us are dreaming of more income, more freedom, more enjoyment from our careers, but we weren't taught how to achieve more income, because dentistry as a skill and as a profession taught in universities is very clinically oriented. And although these clinical skills are necessary, they are not the only skills that you need to manage your patients and your team and your your relationships with other colleagues. So I've seen many dentists struggle with this. And that's why I'm sharing my story and sharing my knowledge that I have accumulated over the last 2 decades. So many of you think if I just work harder and I see more patients and I reduce the cost of delivering the service, I'll be successful. And I have seen many dentists go down this path, right? Just produce more. In fact, working harder is counterproductive. And I dare even to say that seeing more patients, if that is what you think will give you more financial rewards, I would like to say to you, I'd like to challenge this notion, because I don't think seeing more patients is the right answer. I think we have to ask ourselves a different type of question. And we will highlight this in this course. Cutting costs, of course, cutting costs is okay, but we are still a healthcare business. So we deal with people. We don't deal with, car parts. So every costs that we cut will have an impact on the value that we deliver to our customers, our patients, our clients. So why is this not working? Well, if you work harder, you put in more hours, or you do the procedures quicker, you will, on one hand, be exhausted. You will very quickly reach a ceiling of how far you can scale that. It's not scalable. So you can work every day instead of working 7 hours. You can work 8, 9, 10, 11 hours. Maybe some of you can work 12 hours a day. Maybe you can start working weekends as well. And that's fine, right? If that's what you think is the way to earn more, that's completely legitimate. When you reach that, you can increase your revenue roughly by about 30%. But can you double it? No, you won't. You won't be able to double your income by just working harder. So there is some level of stretching that you can achieve, and you can increase your overall income by 10, 20, 30%. And I think we also have to ask ourselves, working harder, what impact will that have on our work-life balance overall? And maybe you're not too concerned with this at the moment, in the short run, but how will this translate into your long-term plan in terms of your availability to your family and friends as well, and the things that you love doing and the life you have beyond dentistry? Because, well, believe it or not, we have lives beyond dentistry. So seeing more patients, in fact, what that leads to is often you're just seeing everyone. And when you want to become a dentist for everyone, you end up becoming a dentist for no one, because patients come in and they can present all kinds of problems to you, and you have no specialization. You have no niche that you are really, really good at. And you're kind of a person who offers his patients or her patients all the services that exist in dentistry, but you don't really excel at any single one of them. You just deliver, generally speaking, good level of care. And maybe your level of care is higher than many of your colleagues, and that's how you differentiate yourself. But bear in mind, seeing more patients, squeezing in more patients every day will have an impact. You'll be running late, and you'll have to kind of shorten the time that you need to spend on a filling or on a crown prep. And inevitably, you will have friction there. And these fields of tension between time that you need to spend on a patient and the quality, the clinical quality, and also the perceived quality by the patient are things that you need to keep in mind. And it's not that you won't be able to do a nice crown prep in 20 minutes if you have to. I mean, we all know that we can, but does our equipment have enough cooling to not burn the tooth and not devitalize the pulp? If we keep on drilling for 20 minutes, I think at some point there's an increased risk of pulp devitalization if we want to rush treatments. And this also applies to carrying out filling replacements, right? If we replace an amalgam, how quickly do we want to replace the amalgam? And do we have enough time to place a rubber dam and to achieve good isolation? Although I don't believe placing a rubber dam will delay you. You won't really need time. You'll save time on isolation if you place rubber dam, but that's a more clinical issue. So let's talk about cutting costs. If you want to cut costs and, you just say, well, instead of having 2 receptionists, because, I have a 5 surgery practice, instead of having 2 receptionists, I'm going to have 1 receptionist. That inevitably, again, will harm the quality of care that you give to patients. Patients have to wait longer to pay for their treatment after having received the treatment, and it will slow down your growth. So you need a strategy. You can't just say, well, let me pull some triggers here and there and achieve some outcomes that are not connected. I think you need to step back and say, what is it that I am doing and how can I organize my work in a way that will help me achieve my goals? So the question is really, can we achieve fulfillment and financial freedom? Or is it one and not the other? So what fulfillment is about? Enjoying the clinical dentistry that you do. So I hope we all enjoy dentistry as a clinical profession, helping patients, seeing the direct results of our work and really engaging with patients to improve their oral health and increase their sense of feeling, I know it's being overused, but feeling empowered so that the patient can take ownership of their own health. I think that's part of what makes clinical dentistry so attractive to many of us. It's about having positive patient relationships. It's about feeling respected and valued by your patients. And it's about achieving a good work-life balance and really feeling in control of your career pathway. Now, what is financial freedom about? Well, in some countries, it's less. In other countries, it's more. But what I found is that the perceived ceiling, and it's emphasized, it's perceived ceiling. Has nothing to do with the real ceiling of what you can make as a dentist and how much you can earn. Often the perceived ceiling is, 10,000 a month. If I talk about the UK or if I talk about in the Netherlands where I worked, and many colleagues I talk to in Europe, they make about 10,000 euros or 10,000 pounds a month and feel as if what they're making is good enough. That's all that they can make. And what if I told you there are dentists who are making ethically, delivering very, very high results, and they are making 25 and 30K a month? And what if I told you there are dentists who are making 45K a month? And what if I told you that there are dentists ethically and deploying their very high skills are making 60K a month in pounds? And this is not something that I'm taking, out of, thin air and just presenting to you and just keeping, a carrot in front of you and say, like, look, this is what you can achieve. No, in fact, this is very much achievable. And it's achievable without major interventions. Just looking at your own skills. What is it that you love? What is it that patients are willing to pay for? And looking at that niche and developing your own little expertise that you can then apply in one practice, in your own practice, or in several practices where you work. So if you're earning now 10,000 a month or 12,000 a month or 15,000 a month, I'm saying that it's achievable to double that easily. You don't even need that big an intervention. And in fact, I've created the 10K to 30K a month roadmap course. And the roadmap course, you can engage with that course in different ways. We have the short track, we have the which runs for about a month. And then there's the long track, which runs for 8 months. And then there is the private mentorship program that runs for 8 months. That's where you get coached and mentored on the different aspects that you can change within your profession. And there are many dimensions, by the way. So it's not about changing one thing. It's about changing 8 to 10 little things. And each one you improve maybe 2% or 5%. And altogether that stacks. You stack all these wins and you achieve a beautiful result without even working harder, really. Yeah, trust me, I'm a doctor. I can only say that it's, I've seen it work in other dentists who have achieved really great results. And I have also delivered it myself. So what is financial freedom? It's about having financial security and predictability. You really want to reduce your financial stress, and where possible, you want to put things aside and money aside to create wealth for the future. And I have seen and I live every day where I can say I see dentists fulfilled and free, financially free. So what are the three pillars of transformation? And we'll touch on these three pillars as they are the foundation for change in this free course. In the 10K to 30K course, which I will touch on here as well, that course goes much more in depth and really provides a framework and a roadmap for you to achieve that tripling in income. And it's a monthly income. Once you triple it, it will be there, hopefully forever, because you learn the skills and you'll earn not monthly 10, 12K, 15K, but you'll earn 30K or more. So one aspect, one pillar, the first pillar is about mindset and the goals that you set for yourself. And you need to really, and part of, this transformation that many of you will undergo, you need to show willingness and be honest with yourself about the limitations that you have set for yourself. And we will discuss these limiting beliefs many of us hold. I used to hold myself. And it's very liberating to step away from these limiting beliefs and to explore really what is achievable. So it's about mindset. One aspect is mindset. And it's a big aspect, because before we even start talking about tripling your income, we need to start talking about the hurdles that are inside our brains that we have set. So we kind of have put up a wall and we've defined that, I'm not a good business person, or, I'm not good at treating periodontal disease, or I'm just not a good dentist. Right? So these types of limiting beliefs really push you back in setting really bold goals. And ideally, you would want to free yourself from those limiting beliefs. But we'll get there. So implementing proven strategies. So it's about implementing proven strategies for income growth and efficiency. So once we've looked at the strategic action and we have started implementing these proven strategies in terms of how to grow our income and how to triple the income and become more efficient, and these efficiencies can be achieved sometimes as delegating tasks, for example, right? That's what we used to do in the Netherlands because the law of the country allows for that type of efficiency to be achieved, while the tariffs for dentists, so dentists to charge their patients, are maximized and governed by, it's a heavily regulated, they're governed by the Dutch Health Authority. So each environment you work in has potentials where you can actually achieve income growth. But we look at each specific country and we can kind of together with you devise a plan. And that's more in the 10K to 30K course. And then it's about consistent implementation, right? So you've learned the skills, you've chosen your goals, you've set your path, and it's about consistency. And consistency is not so much about, deciding on a path and that's it, right? Like, okay, I've chosen this. No, it's about growth as well. So consistent implementation with growth, right? The growth never stops, right? We learn every day, right? We improve every day. We earn more every day, because what you're really trying to achieve here is, you want to improve at all levels. Now, what we do here is we will give you a taste of pillars 1 and 2. We will actually dive much deeper into all three in the 10K to 30K course, which is the 10K to 30K roadmap course. So let's talk about pillar 1, the mindset being the biggest barriers. And let me start by listing common limiting beliefs that I've heard dentists talk about, right? Many dentists I hear say, I can't charge more in my area or in my system where I work, in the practice I work at. And that's a limiting belief. And I have been able to charge more in different settings and in different areas And even in areas where people you might think are not willing to pay more for a service, people actually are willing to pay more for a service. And the notion that I can't charge more in my area assumes a few things. One of the things it assumes is that the service I am providing is too expensive for the demographic that I am serving. If that's the case, then I can move to a different demographic and serve people who are willing to pay for my services. But often it's not that. Often it's that I look at competitors and I see, for example, that everyone is charging $150, pounds, euros for a composite restoration. And have you seen quite often this is a from 150. Why do we do that? Well, because not every filling is the same, right? We can do an occlusal class 1 restoration. We can maybe do that in 20 minutes. Or in some cases, we have to do an ODBL nearly composite crown. And that takes well over an hour. So we want to be able to change our pricing. Now, where is the room for your personal added value? You as a dentist, you with your skill set, why would you not be able to charge double your colleagues' fees if you offer a service that is far better than your colleagues? So bear in mind, patients are like customers. And in fact, you as a dentist, in your role as a dentist, you work as a dentist, so you're on the side of selling a service. But in other parts of your life, you are a customer. So just ask yourself, when you go and buy a coffee, do you go to an established brand that sells coffee, or do you go to a local coffee shop that sells coffee? And why is it? Why is it that you go to that coffee place and not to the other? And is it the ambiance? Is it their Wi-Fi? Is it the actual coffee taste? Maybe it's because they make coffee in a certain way that you don't find in other places. So you perceive a certain value when you go to that place and buy the coffee. And that value can be, as simple as, well, they have maybe sweeteners, right? When I go in, other places don't have sweeteners, right? And I don't want to put sugar in my coffee. Or maybe they have these recyclable cups, right? Maybe you're very conscious of the environmental impact of coffee cups, and you want to support businesses that recycle coffee cups. So there are many ways to differentiate for coffee businesses. Why would we dentists not be able to do the same? So I want you to free yourself from the idea that you can't charge more in your area. You can if you provide the value. And value, you need to differentiate. There is value that we see, right? But if you talk about the distal margin of an upper second molar and you want to shape it nicely, unless you show the patient, right, the patient won't know your added value, right? So there are aspects of added value that can be seen and can be perceived, but there are also parts of the value that cannot be seen. And I think what is very important in our world is that in our kind of profession as dentists is that we try to tangibilize the intangible. So we want to bring to the foreground all the skills that we possess and make it tangible to the patient. And one way of doing that, for example, is by introducing technology, right? So you can start doing your endos under a microscope. That is tangible. The patient can see the microscope, right? Immediately by introducing technology, you're upping your value in terms of clinical quality, right? Because that's what we're mainly concerned with, but also in terms of perceived quality. And as a result, you can charge more. right? And if you're the only person in the area having a microscope or having a cone beam CT scanner or having an intraoral camera where you can visualize for the patients the before, the during, and the after of your work. Taking these pictures with the intraoral camera takes overall maybe a minute extra of your time. But I found that you can actually achieve more by charging more for your work, because all of a sudden the patient can actually see what they have received in their mouth as a product. And so now you're moving your value from a service that is not visible to a product that is visible. And we human beings are very visually oriented, right? So if you have a picture says more than 1,000 words. And if you have a video says more than 1,000 pictures. So another limiting belief is that dentists say, I don't have time to work on my practice. I can only work in it. So they come in and they open shop and they start drilling. In the meantime, they never really ask themselves, how is the patient experience happening? When the patient comes in, is it very clear for patients where they need to navigate to the reception? Where is the waiting room? Is the ambience in the waiting room nice and comfortable? Is there some low, calm background music playing? How do the chairs in the waiting room feel? Right? Are they more of a lounge feel, or are they more kind of hard and cold? How is the waiting room organized? So all these little bits of details within our dental practice need to be looked at, and they need to be part of the patient journey. And if you improve the patient journey, not necessarily the experience in the waiting room, but maybe all you have control over, although I doubt that's the case for many associate dentists, but maybe if all of you have what you have control over is the experience inside the dental surgery, then you need to start asking yourself questions about, am I able to improve the patient's experience, overall experience? And there are many ways of doing that with, temperature control, sound, but also the actual experience. The fact that patients can have a pain-free experience by allowing the local anesthetic to kick in before I engage, in drilling, etc. So there are many ways, many aspects, and this requires a mapping of all the aspects a patient can encounter. And by adding value, you will also be able to add value to yourself, because you will have a more fulfilled professional life as a dentist, as patients also will be valuing your work more. Now, some dentists say marketing is unprofessional and I'm not good at it. And I've even heard that I'm not very much a salesperson. And you don't have to be a marketing executive to engage in marketing, right? The fact that you show up at work in a certain work attire, so your professional tunic that you wear is marketing as well. Because why did you choose white or blue or green or red or burgundy or gray? And that's marketing, right? You're trying to convey a certain message. And that's what marketing is about. Nothing really fancy. We engage in marketing every single day. It's even in the way we speak to our patients, right? We can choose to be very formal and very kind of in a way, it's a bit distant to reinforce the message of authority. But on the other hand, we can also be very hands-on and very, engaging and at times maybe calm. So these changes of the way we interact with our patients are also part of marketing. So marketing is not only advertising, right? There is much more to marketing than just the promotional side of things. Many of you say, investing in training or technology is too expensive. Well, I think you're kind of looking at the upfront cost of training and technology. And the simple fact is that, some technology can help you earn more. So, for example, if you buy a CBCT scanner as a practice owner, and the CBCT scanners nowadays are anything between £30,000, at least that's the price in the UK, or in London, roughly £30,000 to £40,000. You'll get a really good CBCT scan machine, and if you pay that over, let's say, 5 years, you'll maybe be spending £1,000 a month on a lease cost. Now that £1,000 a month, if your fees are about £200 per CBCT scan, you'll need 5 scans a month. And given that increasingly many practices are keeping implant work in their own practice, they have an implantologist coming in, most practices can make at least 5 and can take at least 5 CBCT scans. So that's where you start earning back the cost, the upfront cost that you pay for the technology. And same thing with training. You can't do Invisalign, for example. And bear in mind, I'm not an Invisalign trained dentist, right? Nor am I promoting Invisalign here. But what I am saying is that you can actually achieve more with training, different types of training. Yep. Endo, perio, prosto, oral surgery, pedodontics, sleep apnea. So there are many different aspects of dentistry that you can explore, apart, of course, from even the cosmetic dentistry that is also very much upcoming and with 3D planning software. So investing in training doesn't mean you won't be able to regain that investment. In fact, it is an investment. Yes, in some cases, it is expensive. The upfront cost is high, but you will be able to earn back that money if you choose your training correctly and you choose your technological investments correctly and wisely, and you keep using those skills that you learned and you keep using the technology, you'll definitely be able to earn back without a doubt. Some say it's impossible to find good team members. To those people who say that, I would say the way you treat team members will be a deciding factor whether you are able to find good team members. What I'm saying here is that if you are a person who can be trusted, you will find people who can be trusted. You deserve people who can be trusted if you are a person who indeed can be trusted. And there's a saying that dentists get the patients they deserve and practice owners get the team members that they deserve. So if you instill, hard work, respect, valuing each other's time, and always showing up as a person who leads by example, you won't really have great difficulties finding good team members. My experience across 2 countries, and that's what I have seen in well over 100 different practices. Now, some people think they're just not a business person. Well, what is running a business, right? I mean, if you're an associate dentist, you are in the business of giving your time and selling your skills to your patient base. And I know it may sound very, very cold and very much deprived of the clinical essence of what we do and the human aspect of what we do. And I definitely don't want to go there because, I really want to respect our work that needs to come with a high work ethic. So if you purely approach this as a business opportunity, then that's not the right way of going about things. But if you approach this with the mindset of a clinical person who has been providing clinical care to their patients, but is ready to make and to take that next step, then you'll need to start looking at yourself as a bit of a business person as well. And there's nothing wrong with having a business mindset while maintaining high ethics, very, very high ethics. And part of being a good business person with high ethics comes declining cases, right? Turning down patients who present with problems for several reasons. One reason could be that you're not suitable for the treatment that I can offer you. Another one is because you don't need the treatment that I can offer you. Maybe you need to be seen by someone else, right? Because the treatment that I offer you is not as a number one treatment, right? And I myself have limited my practice to endodontics. That's all I do. And I often get from colleagues referrals who have seen an implant dentist before extraction. And the implantologist looks at the tooth and says, I don't think we should extract this tooth, right? And that really, it creates such a warmth in my heart, because I know that person, that clinician could have also just said, you know what, your dentist believes the tooth needs to come out. You, as a patient, are convinced the tooth needs to come out. It's an easy path for me to walk you through the process of placing an implant after extraction. And I can do that without challenging the notion that this tooth needs to be extracted. But instead, looking at the patient's well-being and looking after the patient and saying, this is not something that I should be doing. See, that is someone with high ethics, but also, in my opinion, a very good business person. Very good business person. Yes, they didn't sell this patient this treatment now. But what they have sold to them is that they are an excellent clinician and that they are not after the patient's money, but they are after the patient's well-being. And guess what? That same clinician will get a referral from that patient because her husband or her friend needs an implant. So we have to think beyond the single case that gets treated in that time the patient is booked in. And I can give you an example of my own experience where a patient is referred to me with pain, and I identify the problem being an occlusion problem, not so much an endodontic problem. I either refer them back to their dentist, or I say, let's reduce the occlusal interferences and let's just test the hypothesis that what we're dealing here with is an occlusal trauma, for example. And I had one case where this lady came in and she was 5 years of pain, basically. And she was suffering from pain in the lower left molar, upper left shooting pains. And cut a long story short, instead of looking at the lower left 6, which everyone was looking at, 3 endodontists, two dentists, and everyone was looking at the lower left 6, short root fill, but no sign of disease. Instead, it wasn't the lower left 6, it was the lower left 7. Why? Because the upper left 8 was over-erupting and rubbing against the lower left 7. It's very simple. Shave down the upper left 8 and test the hypothesis. And guess what? After 5-6 days, give her a call, no more pain. So that patient then recommends a friend to come and have a root canal treatment. So you don't have to be the salesy business type of person to be a good business person, right? So again, challenge these notions that you have. And most of them are assumptions. And if you shift your mindset, that's the first step to unlock your potential. So the next step is about goals. And, if you have a vague goal, the vague goal will lead to vague results. So let's say someone says, I want to earn more. Well, how much do you want to earn more? And what's the time frame you want to achieve that in? So instead of saying, I want to earn more, I can say, I want to increase my net monthly income to $15,000 a month within 12 months. That's a goal that is measurable. That is a goal that is tied to a deadline. And I can work towards that goal because I've identified a number that I can work towards. And instead of saying, I want a better work-life balance, I can say, I want to reduce my clinical days to 4 days a week while maintaining my income within 18 months. So I want to keep my income, but I want to work less I want to work to 4 days a week now instead of doing 5 or 6. And I want to maintain my income, and I want to do this within 18 months. Now I can say, well, how am I going to achieve this outcome? So we've all heard of SMART goals, right? Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. You can use those goals and make them SMART to achieve what you want to achieve, really, as long as these goals are achievable, right? And they have to be relevant within your scope of work. So let me talk about the 10K to 30K roadmap course. So the full course dives deep, and the key strategic areas are about understanding your numbers. So what are your numbers? What is the return on investment? What is your effective hourly rate? And looking at what your true profitability is in terms of the time that you sell. Because what you're doing really is you're selling your time to the practice and to your patients. And then it looks at how can we maximize efficiencies and minimize really all the efforts that are wasted. And part of that, and that's just one part. I mean, there are many parts to income growth, but one part is to focus on high value services, right? While of course, having an ethical case acceptance. It's also about leveraging your team. So how much can you delegate within your team? And I know immediately you may think, oh, well, my team is not ready for task delegation, but you'll be surprised. I mean, we can dive into these task delegation aspects a bit deeper. And we may actually even do that within this free course, just to show you how achievable this is. It's also about attracting the ideal patients. What is an ideal patient? Well, an ideal patient is a patient that comes in and has the willingness to pay for a service that you offer. And if that's the service you offer, great, and they are willing to pay for it, and they have a need for that treatment. So we want to achieve ethical marketing and branding. And if you're an associate dentist, we talk about personal branding as well. So the second lecture will indeed explore the understanding your numbers side of things. So it's 5 lectures. The first lecture we've just talked about the challenges and understanding the challenges, understanding the challenge and the 3 pillars. In the second lecture, we will talk about the numbers, like why it's so important to keep track of your numbers and to get your numbers calculated correctly, because only then will you understand where your time is going and where you can achieve growth in terms of income. And lecture 3 will talk about the roadmap concept and your next steps. And in fact, we will talk about other aspects in lectures 4 and 5 as well. So what I would like to ask you is that you look at what one limiting belief you hold. And maybe it's not one that I listed. And I want you to reflect on this and think how this limiting belief is affecting your income and your career fulfillment, right? So why is it that this limiting belief may have a big impact on, and maybe it's multiple limiting beliefs, but just start with one limiting belief and unwrap this, right? And just look at this and say, is this belief that I hold, is it really true? Is it something that is correct, an absolute fact, and something that simply cannot be changed? I would also like to ask you to write down one specific financial goal for yourself and one specific fulfillment goal for your career over the next 12 months, right? Maybe it's, I want to, earn 10% more over the next 12 months. And maybe it's about, I want to take 2 holidays a year instead of, so I want to get maybe 8 weeks a year of holiday instead of 4 weeks or 6 weeks. So I'm talking about fulfillment. Fulfillment is not necessarily holidays, but it's a personal thing. It's a personal goal. And come to lecture 2, ready to think critically about your practice of finances. Thank you for watching and get ready for lecture 2. All right, so welcome to the lecture series. This is lecture 2, and it's about why understanding your numbers is so critical. Let's dive in. Let's do a recap of lecture 1 very quickly. We discussed the common challenges dentists face. In lecture 1, we introduced the concepts of being fulfilled and financially free, and we outlined 3 pillars. Remember, we said, there's the mindset and goals, and then there's the strategic action, and then we talked also briefly about the consistent implementation. And I gave you some homework where you could reflect on some limiting beliefs and maybe start to define initial goals for yourself. You could write them down or type them in your mobile phone. And then we're ready to start with today's focus, which is we're going to dive into pillar 2, and that's the strategic action side of things. And we will explore why your practice numbers are the real foundation for you to be able to make smart decisions to increase income and efficiency. So, common financial blind spots for dentists include dentists often have an idea of what their gross revenue is. So they know that today I made £1,500, or today I made £1,000, or today I made $2,000. But we don't really look at the profitability per procedure. We don't really know which treatments actually make us money. And that requires an assessment of how much time do I spend on each procedure, and of course, how much do I charge, and what are the costs involved in that procedure. We also don't really know what the true hourly rate is. What is your hourly rate? If I were to ask you now, on the top of your head, what would be your true hourly rate, you probably, 9 out of 10 of you, wouldn't even know what that true hourly rate is. And then many of us have no real idea about where we can gain time efficiencies. And this is about removing any waste and any inefficiencies during the day. And then, of course, for practice owners, there are the overheads. And are they proportionate? Are they controlled? And many practice owners, hire people and engage in, trying to get subscriptions on payroll, etc. But we don't really know, are we doing a good job or not? And what are proportionate overheads in a dental practice? So in order to make strategic decisions, we need data. Right? Without data, there's really no point in making a decision whether to go right or left. So if I were to ask you, what is your most profitable treatment right now, you may tell me it's X. It's this type of treatment. By the end of an exercise that we may do together, you may find that your most profitable treatment is something else. And how do we reach there? Well, it's by looking at the data. So you need data. You need to input data into your system and then calculate what your effective hourly rate is and which treatments are actually most profitable. So let's talk about the ROI, the return on investment per procedure, because not all revenue is created equally. The ROI, and in terms of what's the use of it, it will help us determine the profitability of different treatments. And you would say, well, why is this important? I'm a general dentist. I do everything. If that feels as being the right thing for you, then maybe that's how you should organize your professional life around this. That's fine. And that's perfectly legitimate. You want to stay a general dentist. You don't want to go into a niche. You don't want to specialize. But there's no harm. There's no harm in looking at your ROI per hour per treatment. And the reason I'm saying that is that naturally, we as human beings, the moment we identify something is more profitable, we will be leaning more towards it. And that doesn't mean that you will all of a sudden start prescribing more crowns instead of fillings, or that because you found out that doing fillings has a higher ROI than crowns, you may say, oh, now I'm going to remove crowns from my treatment proposals and all I will be doing is fillings. No, because there will be a need for fillings and there will be a need for crowns. But maybe you want to become more of a dentist who specializes in onlay and crown treatments and large, reconstructive treatments and bite elevations and all that. Why? Because maybe that's the thing that you feel a passion for. And it also happens to give a high ROI per hour. So I think it's about having that information and then looking at the information, looking at the data, and then making that decision whether you want to take the next step, as in choosing the treatment that is more profitable over the treatment that is less profitable. So why it matters: it identifies your most and least profitable procedures. It helps you focus on your marketing efforts and your skill development. So, for example, if you feel restorative dentistry really is very profitable and there is a lot of demand within your practice, maybe that's the area that you need to focus on. And in that case, you will attend courses on how to improve your restorative skills instead of maybe, going on an implant course, right? So having the data will inform your decision making. And in some cases, you delegate. Some other cases, you refer. And maybe you even want to eliminate these services within your practice because they are simply not adding much value to your practice. And once you know what your ROI is, you can say, well, you know what? We are spending a lot of time on this service, but we're not getting a good ROI. So maybe we need to change our fees, right? Maybe we need to adjust our fees because this is something that offers a very low ROI per hour. Now, in the full course, and that's not this course, but in the full course, we give loads of templates for, calculating ROI and many other templates and spreadsheets and worksheets and assignments, more than this introductory bit over here. So let's look at a practical example of procedure A, let's say a crown, right? And the crown costs £600. The cost of the lab is £150. And the total time taken from start to finish, the local the patient comes in, local anesthetic, taking an x-ray, then local anesthetic, then the crown prep, taking the impression, making a nice temporary crown, and then the patient comes back for the fit. All of that is an hour and a half. The profit is £450. The profit per hour is easily calculated. 450 divided by 1.5 is £300 an hour. Now let's look at a composite restoration. The fee is lower, of course, it's £200. There's no lab fees, and the dentist can do it in half an hour. The profit is £200. The profit per hour is £400 per hour. Do you see the difference? The absolute gross revenue, the crown is higher and it fills more of your time. With the composite restoration, it's a shorter treatment, but it is much more profitable. So now you can say either my crown is very low in cost, in the fee, so maybe I should up my crown fee to 800 or 900, right? Or maybe I focus my main work on composite fillings and I refer the crowns to colleagues, right? If I'm very, very busy, right, maybe my main work can be composite fillings. And instead of doing £300 an hour, now all of a sudden you're more towards £400 an hour, and you've just added a third to your income. So while the crown has a higher fee, the filling is more profitable per hour. And you need that analysis to reveal the true picture. So the effective hourly rate is another key metric. And what it is it gives you the full clinical earnings, right? So let's say you make £1,200 a day and you look at how much time you spent on clinical work and you divide the total clinical revenue by total hours spent on clinical work. And what this does, it also highlights the impact of non-clinical time on your earning potential. So, how much time do you spend doing your notes after finishing the day? It tries to get you to improve your efficiency and in some cases even promotes task delegation. And if let's say your effective hourly rate is maybe 60, 70 pounds an hour, and you look at the total time spent in clinic, right? Doing all the clinical and admin and all the other stuff. And then you take that metric and you say, well, I'm doing now 60 or 80 pounds an hour. And you try to improve that by tweaking things here and there. And you look at that again in 6 months, you could be possibly increasing your effective hourly rate to maybe over £100 an hour. And what this does is it motivates you to protect your valuable clinical time. And again, the full course gives you templates and you can record your time and calculate EHR more accurately. Now, what is the impact of non-clinical time on EHR, right? And we've always asked ourselves, where does the time go? Now, imagine this. There's a dentist earning £300 an hour while doing clinical work. Remember, the crown earned £300 an hour, the filling earned £400 an hour. That was just one scenario. Now, let's look at scenario one. And this scenario, a person has 6 clinical hours, 1 admin hour, and 1 CPD hour. So let's say it's an 8-hour day. An EHR might be closer to £225 an hour. It's £1,800 earnings and 8 total hours. And what we're saying here, by the way, so we're saying you're working 6 clinical hours and you're doing £300 an hour, so that's £1,800, okay? But you also have to add 2 more hours for your non-clinical time, and you then divide that by 8 hours instead of 6 hours, right? Now, scenario 2 is less efficient. We have 4 clinical hours and 2 more admin hours and just 2 more gaps, right? 2 more hours of gaps. There is an 8-hour working day, but the HR drops to £150 an hour. So we need to be much more aware of what are the clinical hours that we actually produce our revenue in, and what are the hours that we're still working, but we're not being productive. So reducing non-clinical or unproductive time immediately increases your effective hourly rate. So what happens when you gain insight into your ROI, your EHR? What does that do? Well, what it does, all of a sudden, you will start to prioritize high ROI procedures. And that is either in your marketing to patients or in your training, right? So you'll choose immediately ways to do more of the high ROI procedures, and you become very good at it. You can improve efficiency. So once you've identified that, for example, you have 2 hours a day of idle time gaps, right? And that's consistently every single day, right? You can then address those issues and say, well, all right, I need to reduce my gaps every day. So if I have, let's say, 2 hours every day that are unfilled, and I look at 5 days, that's 10 hours, right? So I'm working 5 days and I have 10 hours of gaps. Well, maybe I should be working 4 days in this practice, right? Or maybe I should be working 3 days in this practice. And then the other 2 days I can organize in different practices, right? So that's one measure where you can become aware of where these inefficiencies may exist. You can then also identify tasks that you don't need to do, right? And you can delegate those tasks, especially tasks that reduce your effective hourly rate. So that's what I touched on, optimizing scheduling, right? So you reduce your gaps and your unproductive time. And then also you take a step back and say, okay, where does looking at my fee structure, which improvement will have the biggest impact on my monthly income? And once you do that, so once you run your ROI and you run your EHRs on a monthly basis, you will track your progress over time, and you'll see a significant increase. Once you start tracking, it's addictive. You will be looking at your historical line, and you will want that line to go up, right? And there are many ways of achieving that. So let's talk briefly about the full course. So this free lecture gives you the concepts, basically, and the full the free course gives you the concepts, while the full 10K to 30K roadmap course gives you much more. So you'll get detailed Excel templates for calculating all kinds of KPIs and all the ROIs and the tracking time and the EHR, etc. Then we also give guidance on how to gather the data and how to use these templates in the right way. And there are many more advanced strategies that you can deploy in terms of achieving better efficiency, become an expert at task delegation. And in some countries, clinical task delegation is a thing, maybe not so much in the UK or US. And we do touch on the pricing structure and pricing decisions. We talk about marketing and your personal brand, and we talk about case acceptance and tracking your case acceptance rates and how to improve case acceptance and what real communication with patients is about. And it's definitely, I can assure you, it's definitely not about these hard sell sales tactics. And if a patient has an objection, how to counter the objection, all that, excuse my French, that is nonsense, in my opinion. Once you connect with the patient at heart level, you're in a different realm. But it requires those skills for you to be able to connect with that patient and to establish, on one hand, your authority, on the other hand, someone who can help the patient make that decision, and so that the patient really feels, empowered, right? They have agency and they can take full ownership of the decisions that they can make for their own health, right? And some of these decisions are not necessarily decisions that we would take, but that patients are entitled to take those decisions because they are in full control and they are in full ownership of their own oral health. So we do touch in the 10K to 30K roadmap course. Each student gets a structured roadmap, and that helps them to achieve their goals. So what I would like to ask you is to think about your top 2 most profitable procedures. Estimate how many hours per week you spend on non-clinical tasks. Just look at, your average week and, how many meetings do you have? How many gaps? How much time do you take to write your notes, etc.? And try to reflect on how knowing your true ROI and effective hourly rate can help you make better decisions. Now, lecture 3, we will introduce the roadmap concept and hopefully guide you on your next steps. That's the end of lecture 2, and we'll see you in the next lecture. All right, welcome to lecture 3. The lecture centers more around the concept of the roadmap concept and your next steps. So let's recap lecture 2 quickly. We explored why understanding your numbers is critical. We talked about ROI. We talked about effective hourly rate. We also talked about how getting data drives strategic decision making so that you can become someone who is aware of how to achieve income growth. And I gave you some homework. So today's focus is to introduce to you the structured roadmap concept, which we will use in the full course. And it shows you, hopefully, this lecture will show you how to translate strategy into actionable steps. And it will show you some options on how to continue your journey to become a more fulfilled and financially free dentist. All right, let's dive in. So, unfortunately, many people have good intentions, but due to random actions, people often don't have sustainable results. So many of us try to improve, but we implement isolated tactics. There is no overall clear strategy on improving all aspects of my work. And we're talking about, not just the clinical work, but also my relationship and my leadership to the dental team, my relationships in my network with the people I collaborate with. So it's far more than just, improving skills to do a filling, or I could do a filling faster, or I can, charge more for a filling, and that's it. There are many more aspects to increasing your income. One of them could, for example, be negotiation skills on how to negotiate better contract terms, which is something that we cover in the 10K to 30K roadmap course. Now, many of us get overwhelmed by trying to change too much all in one go. And that's very unfortunate because we don't really need to change everything all in one go, right? We need to step by step create a plan to change one bit at a time and then see the results and then change something else and then see the results and then build on that. But all these things that we are changing, they are all part of the same plan, right? And we have already predefined those things that we want to change. Now, many of us also lack a system of tracking progress. I mean, we're not financial people, right? So we need some templates that will help us. And unfortunately, many of us just lose motivation if results are not immediate, right? And I can tell you that I have been tracking my ROI and my EHR for over 20 years now. And I have waited a long time to achieve results, but I know you can achieve results much quicker than the time that it took me to achieve those results. Because I see now the patterns. So the mistakes that I made over time, the frustrations, right, and the wasted effort and the staying stuck in the same cycle, all of these I can eliminate in the 10K to 30K course, and you'll see very much something that will help you achieve much better results much quicker. Maybe not immediate, right? Because you need mentally to be trained to abandon certain aspects that are holding you back. So you need to work on that. And then the second part is where we can achieve financial goals by tweaking here and there. And then comes the communication and the sales and the career development and all the other aspects that we discuss in the 10K to 30K course. So what is it, the 10K to 30K? Well, it's I'm going to touch on it briefly. It's a structured plan where, we define together with you what are the specific actions you need to take in what sequence so that you can achieve your SMART goals. And I found that they work because instead of having all these big, large, vague goals, I just want to make more money, and breaks them down into very small, achievable goals and targets. And, you can look at your KPIs and say, I am heading in the right direction, or no, I am not heading in the right direction, and I need to change. I need to adapt my course of action. So generally speaking, in the full course, we give 3 options. Option 1 is a very structured start. You choose from predefined 4-week roadmaps, basically. And these focus on, an aspect, a theme. And you can maybe say, well, I just want a quick income boost, right? And if that's the case, then with that come a certain set of measures, right? And it's good for those who want to get started quickly. So we have that 1 month track. We also have 2 other tracks. One is the guided flexibility track, which, you select your pathway for short, medium, and long-term goals. And we do give you some structure where you can still customize, but there is a structure in place and you can customize these goals as to your needs and your desires and your skill sets. And then option 3 is you have full control. You build your own fully customized roadmap and you define your SMART goals and analysis. And that's really for people who, are very hands-on and maybe a bit more advanced. I don't recommend it immediately to people, but if this is something you feel comfortable with, you can take that on with or without our guidance. So we talked about linking to SMART goals. Every roadmap action must directly support your defined SMART goals. So you want to focus your efforts, right? Alignment is important. You don't want to start working on projects that are moving you away from your target. Let's say you have decided that you want to focus on periodontics and periodontal treatments. And there is this beautiful course that is coming in, and it's about aligner technology. And your friend is going and has invited, it's a full day course. If you're not going to offer these treatments, then why are you going, right? Instead, go on a periodontal treatment course where you can actually achieve better results for your own patients and better results in terms of developing your skills. So everything needs to be aligned within your path, basically. So, training opportunities, which equipment do you invest in? And for example, again, for periodontal treatment, you don't need an intraoral camera, maybe, right? And maybe you do, right? Maybe you want to show patients the healing of maybe periodontal surgery and maybe some grafting procedures you want to show. And going on a photography course for dentists may actually be very useful in your case, or maybe not. So all these tiny decisions are very important because they will help you shape your experience as a dentist. So you want to focus on actions, delivering the biggest progress towards your goals, the goals that you have defined. And by the way, they're not all financial goals. We said, right? We said, yes, it's about like growing your income, but sometimes you want to maintain your income at the same level while working less. In a way, it's about increasing your income, right? But you won't see net more income, but you will have more time off. Okay, so then what I would like to ask you is to look at your kind of current roadmap draft and see if you can link each planned action to your specific SMART goals. So as part of the reflection, I'd like to ask you to just look at which direction you are currently in. And once you have defined those SMART goals, which actions can you plan to support these SMART goals? And also identify some activities that are disconnected from your objectives, right? So can you kind of refine them or can you replace them? Let's say, you want to get more into periodontal treatment, but you are getting a lot of endo, right? And it's not really what you like to do. Well, is there an endodontist in the area you can refer to, right? So you can free up more of your time to do the thing you love and the thing that patients may need you to do because you're very skilled at that. So target ROI and HR, we need your roadmap to increase those metrics or at least monitor those metrics. And we also said if you analyze ROI, you will be able to see where your time is going and also you can boost your HR. We talked about that. So the question really then becomes is, once you develop your roadmap, does it include specific actions to analyze procedure ROI, and what steps are planned to directly increase your effective hourly rate? You don't really want to end up saying, oh, I work 40 hours a week, now I'm going to work 50 hours a week. That's not really what we want to achieve here. And then how will you track these financial metrics? Well, will you use software within the practice? And how do you kind of export that data on a daily or on a weekly or on a monthly basis? And you can then start to look at, okay, I this is the time I spent in the practice on this day, and this is the time I spent on this day, and then you add all that time and you look at your effective hourly rate from one month to the other, and that gives you an idea that you are heading in the right direction once you start implementing these measures. So part of streamlining workflows is that you need to identify bottlenecks, right? Where is time wasted? Maybe it's time wasted between patients, right? Maybe you take 12 minutes, 15 minutes to call patients in, right? Maybe that's where a part of the problem is. You want to simplify your workflows, right? So if you do, let's say, your clinical procedures, try to standardize as much as possible your clinical procedures. So if you're using composite for your restorations, decide on maybe one or maybe two or maximum three different types of composites with maybe limited shade availability, maybe just shade A1, A2, or maybe shade A2 and A3. And once you have that limited kind of set, very well defined set of materials, your nurse will know that the workflow is going to be easy, that there are very little exceptions to the rule, and try to make rules as you, and we touch on that. We talk at length in the 10K to 30K roadmap course about how to optimize, workflows. So that's one aspect. And the other aspect is, of course, getting working four-handed dentistry, right? Being more efficient, and you can batch treatments together. So let's say you say, I want to organize all my periodontal work or all my endo work or all my crown preps on a Wednesday morning, right? Every week. What this does is your nurse knows that every Wednesday morning, these are the materials she needs to get out, and there is an easy flow. So patients come in, all the materials are laid out, all the equipment that you need for this specific procedure. And there's very little time wasted. So batching is one way of organizing your work to become more efficient. And you can look at layout, you can look at how to organize the process of each treatment. And what you're looking for really is standardization as much as possible. And then, of course, you want to leverage technology. So, scanners and software and all kinds of equipment that you can use to increase the accuracy of treatment. But also there is part of the treatment that can be made more accurately. There's a part where you improve, of course, the quality of the work, but also you can actually improve processes by introducing technology. So by introducing an intraoral scanner, you can actually improve the workflow, and you can turn the workflow into a 3D workflow, a digital workflow, very easily without the need to take impressions and send it to a lab, and then the lab creates cast models and all that. Everything is digital, and you get the crowns with much more predictable outcomes and less redos, basically. So technology definitely helps in that aspect, but technology also has something else. Technology helps in branding. Technology helps in the marketing and sales side of things, because technology has an impact on perceived quality. and perceived value. So in terms of, your unique value proposition, you want to use technology very clearly to show the patient that you are at the forefront of adopting technologies that will improve the care for the patient. And that sends the right message, I think, to patients. So you want to manage your time. We want to protect your clinical time, right? And you want to kind of look at, how do I organize my admin time, right? So that's an aspect in its own right that needs to be looked at. And I think it's important, if you ask yourself, what are the biggest time-wasting bottlenecks in your current workflow? Like, where are you losing most time and money? And how can you kind of, within your roadmap, streamline these clinical and admin processes? And part of the 10K to 30K course, of course, is that we help you achieve those clinical and admin process efficiency measures. And of course, how can technology be leveraged for higher efficiency in your practice? Now, the second thing is, of course, how can you leverage the team? You need to identify delegable tasks that you can delegate, and what are the tasks that they can do. It should all fit within the framework of what are the guidelines. So you need to kind of maintain respect of scope of practice. So you can't ask nurses to do something that is not within their scope of practice. And that is very different from one country to the other. But you can still train your team and create protocols to delegate those tasks. And once you invest in time and effort in those protocols, any new team member will know that these are things they should take care of. And part of that is to create an environment where you communicate openly and transparently, and you build trust. That is a very big and important aspect within a dental practice, where we are a people's business, and we have to take into account that people form the heart and the foundation of a dental practice. We talked about boosting HR, and what I'd like you to reflect on is, what specific tasks could you realistically delegate to your team members right now? So think of a few tasks that you are doing that they could be doing. And one of the big tasks that dentists do not delegate, which they can delegate as long as they train their nurses to do so, is to write notes. So while you're talking, the nurse can write your notes, and that helps free up time, because then what you're doing really is you're discussing the treatment plan, and while you are discussing the treatment plan in real time, the notes are being written. And I think you need to, of course, include in your roadmap steps to train your staff and create protocols. And standardization is the key element here. And communication comes, without saying. Communication is key here. It's not just about me saying something and expecting the team to understand it. We need to get the team on board as a full team, basically, and get everyone to embrace what we want to achieve. And you need your team to be with you on the same page. Now, what about marketing and sales? Well, we need to define what is our ideal patient, right? So who is it that we would want to help achieve better oral health? And we need to look internally. So what are my skills? What are my interests? And what is my ROI on the treatment that I can offer this patient? And maybe it's cosmetic treatments. Maybe it's veneers, right? Maybe your ideal patient is a 22-year-old female who lives in a metropolitan area, who is very conscious of the aesthetics of her teeth. And, she may find that she has gaps in between her teeth. Maybe she has a gummy smile. Maybe she has teeth that are too dark or discolored. Maybe she has a few fillings that are not really in the right shade or shape. and, you go in and, you restore anatomy and function, and you improve the overall well-being of that patient by improving the aesthetics. So with a focus on aesthetics, maybe that's your ideal patient. But our profession includes many areas, and it's not just veneers, it's not just cosmetics. As I said, I personally, after quite a few years, decided to go into endodontics. But I believe strongly, and I have seen many colleagues, that in every sub-segment within dentistry, in every specialization within dentistry, you can achieve a very high ROI and define an ideal patient. And you will get the patient if you work towards it. So ethical marketing is important. And why do I say ethical? Because you don't want to make promises that you can't achieve. So you have to make a promise that you can deliver. And in the meantime, you want to maintain truthful and authentic and genuine messaging from a dentist. Because let's not forget, yes, many dental practices are marketing their services in a very commercialized way. And that's fine, if that suits their client base and if that's kind of, what they're looking to achieve. But I think many of us want to maintain the level of communication where we want to say to patients, we are medical professionals and we want to improve your overall well-being. And if in the meantime we improve your aesthetics, great. But we are medical professionals and we're not, again, I'm not like demeaning towards any other profession, but we're not selling kitchens or cars. We are looking at patients who have a need or a want in terms of their teeth or their soft tissues, and maybe they have infections, and there is a duty that we hold to serve them in the best possible way, which maybe other professions don't have. Other professions can look at, what is my ROI on a certain type of car, and I'm going to push more people towards that car. I don't have to do that ethically because, ethics in a way can be stretched and can be interpreted in different ways. So in dentistry, there is really very little space for all this, if I may call it cowboy-like style of marketing. You have to stay grounded as a dentist, in my opinion, and be very, strictly adhering to your values that you were taught in dental school. And, you can still earn a lot of money, but do it ethically. So you can build a brand, of course, and we talk about personal branding in the 10K to 30K roadmap course. And, part of the 10K to 30K roadmap course is also the skills that you can improve in terms of communication with patients. How can you improve your active listening skills? And how do you lay out options for patients? How many options do you give to patients? And at what stage do you present these options? So there's a framework for that. And, we go quite in depth into these. And then, of course, you want to present value to the patient. And part of the value is, of course, you need to highlight that there's a need, right? So you want to create a sense of urgency if that urgency is there. You don't want to create a sense of urgency if there is no urgency, right? So we're not in the business of selling something that patients don't need or want. And, if a patient, for example, needs a filling because there is some leakage of an existing restoration, maybe there's a crack, you want to do cuspal coverage. I mean, there are plenty of justifications for dental interventions. You need to then articulate these treatment benefits when you have identified the patient's needs for that. You can't just say, well, you can, but you won't get far. You can't just say, well, you need a filling. The patient will rightly ask you, why do I need a filling? I am not in pain. Why is it that you feel the need to drill in my teeth, to inject me with needles, and for me to pay a fee to undergo this unpleasant experience? So psychologically, patients are not always ready to get treatment. And we have to make them ready in a way if we feel there's a need to do so. And our role as part of the consultations that we carry out and the dental checkups that we carry out is to screen the mouth, assess risk in terms of caries risk, periodontal disease risk, endodontic disease risk, and long-term occlusal stability. All these aspects, of course, are all within your mind as you're going through a routine checkup, and you then come up with a treatment plan. Now, that treatment plan first needs to address the need that the patient has, and you need to make that very tangible, very obvious. Otherwise, the patient will not take ownership of the treatment, and they will just rely on their trust in you, basically. Just because, I don't know, the dentist said that I need this treatment. Well, guess what? You do the filling, and then you say halfway, the filling is very deep, and I will put in biodentine, or I'll put in some indirect pulp capping, and I'll do a composite filling. What the patient didn't know is, first of all, two-dimensional x-rays provide very little value in terms of diagnostics if we talk about occlusal caries. What you just did was trying to achieve a treatment that is minimally invasive, reducing cost, reducing damage to the tooth, and that will benefit the patient long term. And what the patient then does is they go home and all of a sudden they're in pain, right? And they develop pulpitis, and they come back to you and they blame you. Why? Well, because they didn't feel originally, they didn't understand the need that they had. And part of the problem also is that they don't even understand why is it that you chose what you chose. Instead, imagine this. I take a small picture with my intraoral camera of the tooth and I say, look at this tiny dot, right? That tiny dot is caries deep underneath the enamel. And the patient says, okay, fine, I'm not in pain, but I'll let you do the treatment. Then when they come, as you open the enamel, you take a picture, another picture of the tooth, and where you can see the extent of the caries lesion visually, and you start cleaning it, right? And you take pictures like every couple of minutes, and then you layer your composite, and then you take a last picture. And then after treatment, you give a summary to the patient. You say, look, this is what we saw during treatment. Look at how big the cavity is, and look at how brown it was or dark. And this is what we did when we did the actual treatment, and this is how it looks now, right? Look at how beautiful that white filling is, right? However, I want to warn you, because it's a deep filling, dentine is connected to the pulp, right? And there are odontoblastic cells in there, and these odontoblast cells can actually die as a result of the treatment. So although I tried to save your tooth with as minimally invasive a treatment as possible, bear in mind that you could potentially develop inflammation, right? Now, this patient looks at your treatment in a different way. Now they understand much better that they had a problem. They value you as a clinician because you tried to save this tooth without damaging too much of the tooth, right? Now you're the hero, right? And when the treatment doesn't work out in the way we have planned, when the patient comes back to you with pain, you then can look at them in the eye and say, well, unfortunately, we tried and failed because what we wanted to achieve didn't work out. I think your body is developing inflammation now. And, looking with maybe hindsight, maybe we should have taken more x-rays in the past or, and even that reflection, right? That reflection on what we should have done, right? To get that, to get to that cavity earlier, right? Helps. And I know it's very difficult to criticize our work because we have fear of litigation. But let me tell you something. If you tell the patient like, okay, I think we underestimated the level of caries progression in your mouth because, I look at all your previous x-rays and I see, there is very little progression. And all of a sudden, boom, this progressed much quicker against all odds. So what I want to do now going forward is I want to take x-rays every every year, every 18 months for you, or every 2 years, right? And I want to maybe open up these other tiny occlusal bits, right? And see one that I maybe suspect that could also have a deep cavity, right? So in that way, you're showing your patient that you are a dentist who has an ability to self-reflect and to scrutinize their work and to criticize their work to become better, to deliver better quality of care for their patients. And I think we want to be perceived as dentists who are highly skilled and don't make mistakes. Well, guess what? You make mistakes. You think I never made mistakes? Every one of us makes mistakes. And owning up to these mistakes and telling the patient, like, look, I misjudged this one. I thought this one was going to go very shallow and it's now very deep. I now have to rethink the way I look at your teeth, right? And having that discussion will help not only remove the risk of litigation, reduce it at least, it will also help increase the trust the patient has in you. Because the patient will feel, even if I don't understand anything about dentistry, I have a dentist next to me who is looking after me. Someone who is really trying their best, given their human limitations, is really trying their best to achieve the best results. And they will start seeing you more as a human doctor rather than a god, this person who just can fix all my problems and deliver 100% results all the time. It doesn't exist. We know that, right? So I found that the most loyal patients are patients who are treated in a way that you would maybe treat your family members. All right, so let's talk about ethical acceptance. So, you want patients to make informed decision-making. And the way that informed decision-making works is that they need to be informed. Otherwise, there's no informed decision-making, right? So ideally, you would want patients to be presented with all the facts as they are without you really getting in the way and telling them left, right, center, right? And then at some point in your story, once you have presented facts, you can say, you know what, I think personally, if I may, I think going down that path is the right way, and I have my arguments, and you can present your arguments for that. So it's very important to guide this informed decision-making without pressure. And unfortunately, I've seen too many apply too much pressure because, some of us decide we have our own agendas. And part of our marketing and sales efforts is to generate more money. So, we want to generate more money. How do we do that? Well, I want people to choose more crowns, right? Or I want the patient to do 2 crowns, one next to the other, and I'm going to kind of push them to do those 2 crowns. In my opinion, apart from, of course, clinical reasons, which is, of course, they're very legitimate because if you do 2 crowns next to each other, you get better marginal adaptation, you get better aesthetics, etc. Okay, fine. These are good arguments. But other than that, there's very little reason to push to doing the 2 crowns all in one go. And if the patient says, I really feel I need to do the crown in, one at a time, I think they should have that freedom. And I have met dentists who say, no, I just, I've even met a dentist who said, I only do 2 crowns, right? There is no way I do 1 crown. And that's very unfortunate. I think that's unethical. But anyway, so as I said, you can earn a lot of money ethically. And I think that's the underlying message, right? If you're looking for very quick gains and ready to kind of compromise on your ethics, then I think on our courses, you're not in the right place. And we do select actually our students. We pre-qualify the candidates, and some people just, won't make it, unfortunately, because we need alignment of values there as well. So have you clearly defined your ideal patient profile? What specific ethical marketing actions are included in your roadmap, and how can you improve the way you communicate value during consultations. And we touched on that briefly. In the 10K to 30K course, we go in much more depth. One last thing I want to kind of touch on when it comes to marketing and sales. What is your current case acceptance rate? So, you have new patient consultations. How many of these treatment plans that you send out get accepted? And what is the value of these treatment plans overall? And that's an interesting thing to look at as well, because a lot of the value comes from the new patients who come in with, all kinds of oral disease that we should be treating. Now, when we look at skill development, you want strategic CPD, you want to really invest in courses that elevate your skills, and those skills need to fit in your overall plan. I would strongly recommend against doing these CPD courses that just don't add any value, real value to your skill set. It's a waste of your time, in my opinion. And you want those skill development efforts to align with your goals, as we said, and where possible, and this is maybe the first time where I'm really touching on this, ideally you would want to develop a niche. Some niche. You don't have to be very much focused on the niche alone. So let's say you want to go into orthodontics. You don't have to completely eliminate all other parts of dentistry and just focus on your niche, your orthodontics. Apart from that, you have to, of course, give it time to grow, right? And that needs time. And you need also time to have a learning curve. So you need to allow for some time. And you can't just say from one day to the other, oh, I'm abandoning dentistry and I'm going into orthodontics. And maybe you can do that if you have gone into specialist orthodontist training. That's fine. Or if you're a registered specialist, that's fine as well. But we're talking about general dentists who are still doing general dentistry without really developing a niche. And I think that's a missed opportunity here. So you will want to improve your core skills, and you will want to plan and budget for those. Set money aside for CPD. Don't spend all your money. And then once a course comes along and you can actually do the course and really increase your skill set, you don't have the money to pay for it. So next is you want to implement learning. You want to include steps to integrate these new skills into your daily practice. Let's say you went on a photography course. You would want to get your own camera and start recording these cases, right? Start making treatment plans with, pictures, and it becomes, your treatment plans become far more than just the actual treatment that you want to provide with the price. So what is your current planned CPD, and does it align with your income and clinical goals? Or are you just going on CPD that is not really helping you to achieve your goals? And maybe you haven't defined your clinical goals yet. So maybe we need to start by doing that, right? And then, of course, once you have focused on the new skill development, you want to ensure that these new skills that you learn, that these are actually implemented, right? So if you have, for example, done an implant course, then the next step is to get your own implant kit, then to talk to the practice owner and to say, is there space for me to do implants? And if you don't feel comfortable doing implants, maybe you need to look for someone within your network, or not maybe necessarily the direct network, but maybe the secondary network. Ask around for anyone who is willing to mentor you in your implant journey, basically. And again, we touch on that with far more depth in our 10K to 30K course. Then there's the aspect of monitoring. You want to track progress with KPIs, and you need to use KPIs, key performance indicators, and these are linked to your goals. You want to select relevant KPIs that are relevant to your goals, basically, whether it's finance or efficiency or operations, or all kinds of KPIs that you can look at and measure on a monthly basis. And then you start tracking. So you need spreadsheets, you need to input the KPI data into your spreadsheets, and it requires an effort that is consistent and very focused. And that's how you get from 10K to 30K to 50 to 60K. You don't get from 10K to 60K if you can't establish what you're doing, and you can't establish tracking. You must track your income, otherwise you'll just be doing everything without real plan. And then of course you need to review your goals, and you need to sit down and say, okay, where am I in my journey? Right? Is this plan that I have set out, is this working? Right? And if it's not working or not working enough, what can I do to change that and become, achieve more out of my roadmap? You want to analyze, right? And again, you adjust your plan, as we said. And the good thing about monitoring is, of course, that it keeps you accountable and it keeps you focused on implementing your roadmap. Because if you lose track of your kind of KPIs, you don't know anymore whether you're heading in the right direction. What this does is you kind of lose focus and you lose interest in the original goals that you set. And without even achieving them, halfway you'll give up. And that would be very unfortunate, because I know what I have achieved, many dentists can achieve as well. And I have seen many dentists achieve that. Very good, very skilled dentists achieve great results. So as a reflection, how does your planned CPD align with your income and clinical goals? Are you focusing only on mandatory requirements or investing strategically in skills? And how will you ensure new skills learned through the CPD are actually implemented? So in terms of phased implementation, you want to avoid overwhelm. As part of doing that, you want to break down the roadmap into manageable short, medium, and long-term phases. In the short term, 1 to 3 months, you want to focus on the foundations and any quick wins, very, very easy to implement. You want to start tracking, you want to increase your efficiency here and there to really, maybe adjust your pricing a bit, right? Focus a bit more on certain treatments and maybe drop a few of the treatments that you don't want to do. Medium term, you're going to implement bigger changes. You're going to learn more skills. You can delegate tasks after training your team. So there are far bigger changes that you can implement. And in terms of long term, we're talking about real niche development. And that's where you can really grow into, not just doubling or tripling, but you can actually get a 6-fold or 7-fold of your current income by implementing all these strategies one after the other consistently. So you want to sequence logically. Of course, you don't want to do things way too early. And you also want to really allow yourself to remain flexible. Okay, so you want to not close doors and remove options too early. Okay, because what seems as a reasonable path now may actually not be your best path, right? So you may explore cosmetic treatments and then you start doing it, and after 3 months you find, actually, I don't see a big use case for this. The number of patients who would want this treatment are very few, and I don't see how I can improve on that. So I'm going to choose a different niche or a different roadmap. So the question is your roadmap clearly divided into manageable phases? And do the actions within each phase seem realistic and achievable for the time frame? We want to achieve everything within a day, and that's just not possible, right? You have to set realistic expectations from day one. So what we did with this free course, and there are 2 more lectures, in fact, is we recognized the need for change. We defined the initial goals. At least I hope I helped you define initial goals. And I hope I kind of was able to bring across the critical importance of this, of EHR, ROI, and how important these numbers are for you to track. And really, it's about translating all this awareness into a plan. And you may be able to create that plan on your own. So option one is you create this plan on your own and you do it all yourself. And you can take all these concepts, the mindset, goals, ROI, EHR importance, and you build your own plan and systems. What I find is that many dentists really don't have the time to develop all these strategies from the ground up. So they need some guidance. Many dentists do need guidance. But if you're a dentist who needs very little guidance, then maybe the 10K to 30K course is not a thing for you. There is a risk, of course. You could be implementing random actions. And also there's very little accountability and, there's no external perspective. And I think when you talk to us, you'll find that we can challenge many of the notions that you may hold and the beliefs that you hold. And we can kind of change your perspective on certain elements because we know what works within the industry, within the dental industry. And I think overall, you're risking slower progress and more likely than not, you'll be stuck. But, if you're really good at implementing these concepts, I would say go ahead and try implementing them. And I really sincerely hope you can achieve a very high result with the implementation of these concepts. The other option, of course, is to join the full 10K to 30K course. I'll just very slowly and very briefly highlight these. There is an element of one-to-one coaching on the top tier. There are 18 in-depth video lectures, far more in-depth than what we've covered up until now. And we give you many worksheets to use for your analysis and planning. We give templates, Excel templates, if you want to use them for your KPI monitoring and time tracking. And we give you the structured roadmap framework. We give resource lists, KPIs, barriers, goals, and roadmaps. So, lists you can choose from. Like, what are the barriers? In my case, we have defined a list of barriers. We have defined a list of KPIs that you can use. You can say, well, I want to track this and this and this KPI for my own case. So you can customize your experience really to your own needs. And you'll have lifetime access. You can learn at your own pace, but usually these programs run for 8 months. So that we have a special offer for free course attendees. And the special offer is we want to offer you a 10% discount on the full course. And, once you sign up, we know that you had a look at the free course and we will give you a 10% discount. Okay. So this is the end of lecture 3. There are 2 more lectures, which I highly recommend you watch because they're very insightful as well. And they hopefully will bring you closer to being able to understand how you can become a dentist more fulfilled and hopefully financially free as well. See you on the next lecture. All right, so lecture number 4 of this series is about the high impact strategies and mainly the communication and value creation. And we touched on this briefly, but we will discuss this in more depth in this lecture. So there is the communication gap, which we are all aware of, and we all know that communication is crucial, and it's actually as vital as clinical skills for treatment acceptance. One dentist has a treatment acceptance rate of 80%, whereas another one has a treatment acceptance rate of 40%. Why is that? Well, a lot of it, and I would say maybe 90% of it, is due to communication skills the clinician holds and how well are they able to convey the message to patients. So one of the pitfalls, using jargon, right, that patients don't understand, assuming patients find a £1,000 treatment plan as too expensive, not listening. So the patient comes in with a desire to solve a problem, and we are talking about all the other problems, but forgetting really what the patient wants. And that tends to lead to confusion, and the patient doesn't feel heard, doesn't feel understood, and refuses treatment. And we then look back and say, well, this patient wasn't really our kind of patient, right? Well, this patient maybe was our kind of patient, but we didn't tailor our style of communicating to the need of the patient. So the impact tends to be, that poor communication will, of course, affect trust. Communication is a very vibrant thing that is continually evolving and very much changes per patient, per moment of the day, as the discussion goes. During the first phase, the communication is very different than during the last phase of the consultation. So communication is not an exact science. It's not 1 + 1 is 2. So we need to be very flexible in our way of dealing with patients and dealing with communicating with patients, and be very clear on what is it that we want to achieve when we communicate with patients. Am I trying to establish, for example, my authority over patients, or am I trying to bring across a very low barrier, minimize friction, that kind of treatment communication? So I think the more we understand our position as dentists and our position as communicators with the patient, the more the patient will be able to understand us better. Well, the more the lines become clearer. As a result, you'll simply see better outcomes. Maybe not necessarily better outcomes as in, more patients taking up treatment, but definitely better outcomes in being more in your communication with patients. So the goal is really to learn strategies to communicate effectively and build value. Now, what I want you to do is really think back a treatment or a consultation that you had where the patient didn't accept the treatment, where they said, I don't feel I want this treatment that you're proposing. We've all had that. And that's not something bad, but it should form a learning moment for us, a moment to reflect on and say, is this type of consultation, does it provide any value for any future consultations? So what is the learning that I can get out of this type of consultation? And can I improve my communication with the patient? What went wrong? And part of analyzing what went wrong is to adopt a stance that is vulnerable, to say, what could I have improved? Did I approach the patient in the right tone? Did I say the right things? Did I say the right things but use wrong words or difficult words, confusing messaging? Did I make sure the patient understands the urgency behind treatment? So there are many aspects to communication, and again, we usually touch on that during the bigger course. One other thing, of course, is what is one common communication pitfall you sometimes fall in, and you know that better than others. And sometimes it's under pressure. We want to rush patients, right? We don't want to really hear their stories, and so the messaging becomes very much packed, and say, well, here it is, right? You need a filling or you need a crown. That's it. Take it or leave it. And the patient sometimes gets this message and thinks, well, I'm going to have a think about it. There's very little to think about because the information they received was very minimal. And if the information they receive is very minimal, then the decision is very easy to make. Do I trust this dentist, or do I not feel really the need to go for that treatment because I'm not in pain, or I have other things to prioritize? So the moment the patient enters your room for a checkup, you can rest assured that they want to listen to you. They want to listen to your assessment of their oral health. And they have their receptors open. Like, am I in good oral health or not? Is my oral health okay? And they come to you for checkups to really try to get a better understanding and treatment, of course, if things have gone wrong. But they want to get a better understanding of their oral health status. Otherwise, why would they spend time coming to see you? So their receptors are open. They're willing to listen and they trust you as to the checkup. Now, in order to trust you for more, you need to, as a dentist, bring across that message that is right for them. So with the right tone, the right word choice, etc. There's more to that. What do we say? What do we not say? So a few practical tips. When you want to establish first impressions, say things with a smile. You can still be an authority, but you can set a positive and welcoming tone. Part of the active listening that we need to do is to let patients talk and finish the talk without saying a word. I mean, if that helps you, you may even just take some duct tape and just put the duct tape on your lips while the patient is talking. But what I mean is, when the patient talks, we are silent and we are listening. We should try to not listen to our inner voices saying, oh yeah, I've heard this before. Come on, you're telling me about your aches and pains and food got stuck there. And it's like, yeah, I know. Don't worry. I'm going to fix it, but I'll be able to see it. But the patient feels the need to say it to you. And as long as the patient feels that need, I think the patient needs to be given that space. And it usually is no longer than 40 seconds. Within 40 seconds, the patient will have explained their common, pains and their concerns. Then you can say, okay, well, let's have a look, right? So that has given them the space to express themselves, and it shows them that you are an active listener. That active listening, by the way, and I'll get to the verbal and nonverbal cues, but that active listening is so important that it will also inform your decision on how to communicate with the patient. So am I talking to a patient who is very focused? Or am I talking to a patient who wants to feel okay about the dentist treating them? Or am I talking to a patient who wants every single detail of the treatment laid out for them so that they can choose? Or maybe they're a patient who says, oh, you know what, I trust you. You just go ahead and do the treatment. I don't want you to tell me, what you're planning. And it's like, yeah, but I need to tell you, we're going to do this and this treatment. I was like, yeah, okay, you know what? I trust you. And each patient will need a different communication style tailored to their needs. And you can get that impression by allowing them to talk and by active listening. Now, verbal and nonverbal cues are ways to kind of show that we are human beings, that we are not robots, and that we are filled with empathy. And this is about showing your EQ, right? Instead of your brain and how much you have studied in university, this is about showing, how emotionally intelligent I am. And it's this emotional intelligence often see lacks in our profession, because our profession has been commoditized. It's become, okay, I'll go to the dentist like I go to, like I'm buying sugar or like I'm buying bread, right? I go to the dentist, they do what they have to do. I don't understand what they're doing. Yeah, I don't necessarily have to feel any connection to my dentist, right? But in the meantime, they're a butcher, right? Because they drill in my teeth and I tell them I'm in pain. They don't listen, right? And they stab me with all these needles and they charge me like, half a fortune. And in the meantime, I'm also left clueless, right? I have no idea what they do every time, right? But they do these things, right? So verbal and nonverbal cues are the first step to help bridge that connection, showing that, okay, you're actually a human and you are able to engage with the patient at human level. Because once they start seeing you as a human being, not like this professional, that distant professional who they have no connection to. Now, all of a sudden, you are a human being with your family and with your own holidays and with your own back pain. And, maybe you bought a new set of specs, right? And you changed your hairstyle and all these kind of things that make us human, right? And part of our communicating with the patient is the word choice, our tone, my body language, right? Am I sitting? Am I standing? Where do I keep my hands, right? All these, do I nod, right? All these things play a role. And how sharp is my look at the patient? Do I have this sharp look to the patient indicating authority? Or am I, reducing that level? And sometimes, the first one is needed. Another time, the second one is needed. So it's very, very much dependent on how the patient themselves and what the patient needs at the end of the day. Because again, it's not about us, it's about the patient. Yeah, so you want to use patient-friendly language. You don't want to use technical jargon. But technical jargon, on the other hand, also establishes authority, right? So for example, I can say, there are these cells, they're called odontoblast cells, and they exist at the interface between pulp and dentine, and I say the word, right? And the patient will forget the word, right? Because they're not medically or dentally trained. But then in the meantime, I'm trying to explain it. I'm trying to show that actually I am an authority in what I'm saying. I know what I'm talking about, but I'm going to educate you, right? I'm not going to lecture you, right? I'm not going to tell you off for not brushing. I'm not going to tell you off because you didn't use the interdental brushes and all that. No, but I am going to be your partner in trying to achieve a better outcome for your oral health. So that stance as a clinician from a clinical perspective is powerful. And then you can actually use technical jargon while explaining them. But using technical jargon without explaining will leave the patient, clueless. They will have no idea what you're talking about. There is, of course, these techniques, ask, tell, ask techniques actually. But you're basically what you're trying to achieve is, I have just introduced a concept. Is the patient on the same page, right? So, as I'm explaining, right, I say, okay, there is this, right? Is that okay? So you keep getting feedback from the patient. And we usually naturally, but there are definitely techniques that we usually touch on in the bigger course as well. As a matter of reflection, how consciously do you focus on active listening during consultations? And what is one specific way you can improve your use of patient-friendly language this week? So try to implement these. Are you actively listening is a big thing in our consultations because, we book a checkup. Let's say, I don't know how long you book a checkup, but let's say, many practices, unfortunately, don't book half an hour or 45 minutes simply because it doesn't give an ROI high enough. But, there is also this other element where you need to invest in your consultations to achieve a better outcome, both financially and clinically, and long-term trust-wise. You'll win more patients. Because, some dentists maybe have to do a checkup in 10 minutes or 15 minutes. They don't really have the time to do that kind of big engagement on a social and emotional level. But still, we can active listening as part of our checkup routine. So one part to achieve higher income as a dentist is to shift your focus from, and I'm talking about your focus and the focus of patients, from cost to value. Because if I look at, for example, what people spend on a car, then all of a sudden, what is a £2,000 worth, right? So we know people spend maybe 10,000, 20,000, 50,000, maybe sometimes even 18, 100,000 on a car. But then when it comes down to dental treatments, they look at a treatment plan that is £800 and they're like, that's too much. I can't afford it. And then they go out and they drive their, Mercedes that is worth 50,000. And that's where there is a bit of a disconnect. So it's not about cost. It definitely is not about cost. It is about value. Where is the value perceived? Well, in the £50,000 car, a perceived value by the patient that this 50,000 is good value for money, and I am getting this car and I'm willing to spend 50,000 on it. Then next thing, I'm quoted £800 for a crown, and all of a sudden I don't see the value of that. And therein lies our duty as dentists to convey the value, to show the patient the value of the crown. So we need to explain why the crown is necessary, what not making the crown will put the tooth at in terms of risk. So the tooth may fracture. Once the tooth fractures, if the fracture is too deep, the tooth needs to come out, then you'll need to have an implant, and the cost of an implant is £3,500, £4,000. Instead of risking that path, we can put a crown on the tooth, and the crown will cost £800. It is a white crown, fully, according to the latest technology, etc. So all of a sudden, you have communicated value. But in order to understand value, we need to first start at the patient perspective side of things. We need to understand what is it that this patient actually values. And again, this is not about selling people things they don't need, right? In my career, I can assure you, I have declined so many treatments. I have absolutely said to patients, there's no point in me selling you this treatment. I'm not going to treat you. For example, let me give you an example. There was a girl who came in, and this was way before, I decided to do practice into endodontics. So this girl came in for a veneer. She wanted veneers, and I looked at her. I said, okay, well, why don't you talk to me about your concerns? Why is it that you feel you need veneers? Because they have a problem, right? But they don't talk to you about the problem. They talk to you about the result. They want a treatment. They heard that veneers are a great solution. And, I said to her, okay, fine, we can talk about veneers, no problem. But why don't we talk first about your problem? What is it that you're trying to solve? And she said, well, I have a gap, right, in the central diastema, upper front. And she was, I think, 19 years old. And I want to close the gap. And I said, okay, well, there are many ways. She said, yeah, I don't want braces. I said, okay, yes, indeed, braces are a way. She said, no, I'm not wearing braces. I said, okay. So let me talk you through the different options. So I started speaking about braces. And I understand you don't want it, but I want you to know all your options, and I will talk about veneers as well. Okay. So I started talking about braces, and I started talking about, Invisalign, other types, the lingual braces and the clear braces. And these are options out there. I don't do those treatments, but these are options that are present for you. And then there is the veneer option. There are benefits to it because it's very quick. Another benefit maybe is to make the teeth whiter, right? Although you can achieve the same with whitening. However, that was white. It wasn't her concern. Her concern was about aesthetics. So I said to her, the big downside of veneers in your case, because you have teeth, like completely virgin teeth, in pristine condition, never been touched before by any drill or any fillings, or never had a trauma. I said, the problem is the drilling that happens. She said, no, I want veneers that can be put in without drilling. I said, the problem is with those, they're very thin, of course, but they still protrude, and you already have quite a bit of protrusion in your upper front. So in order to achieve a good result, you'll need to have some drilling. So I showed her some examples of veneer preps, and immediately she said, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not having veneers. I said, okay, well, in a way, I didn't necessarily need to talk her out of veneers. But what that did is it opened up the space. She said, okay, but I want to get rid of the gap. I said, okay, well, maybe one of my colleagues can help you identify the best way in terms of orthodontics, right? Not necessarily the braces type, maybe aligners, better, to achieve a nicer smile. And she went and had a discussion with one of our orthodontists, and she decided to go for aligners. So it's really not about trying to sell patients treatments that they don't need. But what you need to do is you need to link the benefits with the patient's perspective, right? To better align what you can offer or what colleagues of you can offer to the patient and what is in the patient's best interests. So it's about alignment, not necessarily sales skills and driving sales unethically. So what I used there with her, with this patient in this specific case, I showed her veneer preps, right? And when you see veneer, perhaps, you often see just denting, right? And it looks, quite invasive. And for the patient, that was enough to not go for veneers in her case. And I definitely must say there are plenty of use cases for veneers. I've placed plenty of veneers in my time. So you want to explain the why behind treatment using the visual aids, or the why not, right? To kind of highlight the treatment as an investment, right? And maybe investment is not the right word, right? Sometimes it's an expense that they want to make to avoid disease, to avoid fractures, to strengthen, to stabilize, to align, right? We need to use these words to patients embrace the concept of spending that money. It's not gone to waste, right? So I have met several actually patients who come to me for root canal treatments, and I say to them, look, I can do a root canal treatment in this tooth if I only look at this tooth in isolation, but I can't, because I just took a scan, a cone beam CT scan, and I can see other problems. And I think given, for example, your periodontal status, you need to have a real in-depth discussion with a periodontist or with your dentist or with a hygienist on how to stabilize your periodontal health, and then talk about maybe, closing the gaps, stabilizing your bite. If all of that fits within the overall plan to save your teeth and getting your oral health up to a better place, yes, then a root canal treatment makes sense. But with your current oral hygiene, with the current periodontal problems, maybe endo is not the right way, right? Maybe extraction is the right way, because, you're losing bone. And we know that teeth that have been root canal treated, most of them are lost because of non-endodontic reasons. So having that open discussion with the patient is, I think, very, very important. So framing it as an investment, yes, but I wouldn't use the word investment when I talk to the patient, because investment, again, refers to money, yeah? And it looks like nearly as if like I'm paying money to get money back. Instead, I would talk about improving your health, aligning your teeth, reducing the risk of future disease, that kind of thing. And this comes down to the value-based language, right? So we want to explain the benefits clearly and confidently. So how can you better understand what each individual patient values most? Well, usually by, active listening, and really to look at this individual case as much as possible in its own kind of isolation, without looking at all the other cases that you had on the same day. Now, if you look at, for example, one treatment or one type of treatment that you do, how can you frame the value of that treatment beyond just a clinical need, right? So what is the value for the patient beyond that clinical need? Maybe you want to offer, right, cosmetic treatments. Is the value beyond that clinical need for patients? Maybe it improves patients' confidence at the workplace. And then, of course, are you using visual aids, right? Because you want to demonstrate the why behind the treatment. Now, you want to, as part of your ethical case acceptance, you want to present options fairly, right? You want to talk about risks, you want to talk about benefits, and you want to talk about all these other alternatives. And sometimes one of the alternatives is do nothing, right? Just, leave things as they are. And as long as you're aware that you're dealing with adults who can make those decisions, they are entitled to do nothing if that's what they want. It's not what I would recommend in many cases, but that's up to the patient to. Now, part of our informed consent process, and it's an ongoing process, of course, make sure that the patient really understands the problem, right? They understand the problem, they understand the solution, and they understand the consequences and the implications of their decision making. Ideally, we want to guide. We don't want to pressure. We don't want to coerce patients into treatment. You really want to avoid all these pressure tactics, quick selling techniques, because what I found is that people who are coerced into, pressured into a certain treatment, they tend to not really take full ownership of that decision, because control shifts to you. And when the onus of control shifts to the clinician, all of a sudden the patient becomes helpless. And when patients become helpless, they undergo treatment. And when things don't go the way they had kind of hoped for, what do? They go to a solicitor, a lawyer, and try to get their money back. Or they try to sue you because you ruined my teeth. Because I handed over to you all responsibility. You were in control of my teeth and you ruined my teeth. Instead, if you don't pressure them, if you don't really coerce any patient, they will keep their ownership of their decision making. And you'll find that patients actually are very happy to take that account for their own decision making, just like any other human would. So ideally written treatment plans, because what the written treatment plan does, it shows the patient in a structured way what you want to tell them. And we are visually very much stronger than our listening skills. And ideally also get a signature from the patient on paper, because after reading the consent form, once the patient signs, that is a way for the patient to say, yes, I have accepted the risks. I have embraced this treatment option and presented other treatment options. And that also helps in the patient taking full ownership of that decision. And you will get less, back and forth. So many dentists struggle with handling cost objections. The patient says, well, it costs too much. And I think there are several ways of dealing with cost objections. As a first step, really, is to listen and validate the patient's concern. When the patient tells you that they have a concern with the cost, that's a serious concern they have. They're not just making it up. And I think there's no point being defensive about this message that the patient is sending to us. We can't say, so the patient tells me, oh, this £800 crown is too expensive. And I can say, well, no, it really isn't. Well, that's me being defensive. That's me denying them the right to raise this as a feeling or as how they perceive this number. So the right way of going about this is to say, well, I understand it is a lot of money, right? So when you say it costs too much, I translate that and I say, well, it is a lot of money, but you also get a lot. So you get a lot of value for this money. So the cost may be high, but the value equally is high. And what is important is that you really go back to the value. So you focus the efforts on reiteration of the value. Like, yes, this crown is meant to strengthen the tooth. You can leave the tooth and accept the risk that the tooth might fracture. It's up to you. And when the fracture happens, then the cost is higher. So higher, a multiple actually of £800. So that's communicating the value. Now, you're not talking about whether the 800 is a high cost or a low cost or no. Well, it is a lot of money. For some people, it's pocket money. For others, it's unaffordable, right? So we can't just ignore the fact that the patient is saying, it is a lot of money for me, right? And I think we have to listen to that. All we can do really from our perspective is say, well, yes, it is a lot of money, the value this brings. And then you can, of course, discuss options. You can maybe give them payment plans or, all kinds of options that you can talk them through, and also other alternatives, of course, right? And when the patient makes that final decision, right, accept it. That is their right, right? There's no need to be very kind of disgruntled about it. If the patient decides not to proceed, that is well within their rights, right? It's not that they have to agree with me to accept the treatment. So the question here really is, are you comfortable, and how comfortable are you discussing fees with the patient? And if the patient communicates cost concerns with you, how do you deal with those concerns? And what are you currently saying? When the patient is saying it's too expensive, what do you do? Right? Do you just say, well, yeah, it's expensive. Well, that's what it is. Have a think about it. Goodbye. Or do you really engage with the patient and trying really to reiterate the value and give them maybe other ways of spreading the cost? And this reiteration of value we train at the 10K to 30K course, the full course, much better. So effective communication, right? Building trust, focus on value, acceptance. All of these are very important if you want to improve patient outcomes and also your own kind of professional satisfaction. The more you practice it, the better you'll get at it. And ideally, you want to kind of identify one skill that you can take away from this lecture, be it active listening or maybe one of the other concepts. And try to consciously practice this technique with your patients. And I would start with active listening, right? Just be silent when the patient is talking and look at the patient and try to absorb what the patient actually is saying, what the words are and what message they're sending me beyond the words. Maybe they're all about feeling. Maybe they're trying to just reconnect, right? Maybe they're lonely. So these are things to be looking out for. Some reflection. And that's the end of lecture 4. We have one more lecture within this free course that I want to share with you. So I look forward to seeing you then. Bye-bye. All right, welcome to lecture 5, the last one of the series within this free course. And it is really to wrap up all the things that we mentioned and to give you some last guidance on next steps. So let's bring it all together. We talked about mindset, we talked about goals. And by the way, we talked very briefly about all these things, but it's, we just touched on them very briefly. In the full course, we go in much more depth. So we talked about mindset, goals, awareness of all the financial processes that are happening. We talked about efficiency and task delegation and communication and value. And these are not the only concepts that you need in order to achieve more fulfilled life as a dentist in terms of professional life. But they are a small step towards the goals that you set, a small step in the right direction. Now, a lot of these concepts and many more actually that we will again introduce in the bigger course are interconnected and they work together. So just for example, just changing your mindset will help you a couple of percent. Maybe changing your mindset will help you 5%. But then you need to define goals, right? And then once you define goals, you need to track those goals. You need some financial awareness. So, part of the process is one depends on the other, right? So let's say you're tracking the goals and then you're not introducing any efficiencies. So then you need to be aware of all the efficiencies that you can introduce. But I'm not converting my treatment plans into, more acceptance. So we need to work on communication, right? And all these tiny concepts, they all come together and they make you a better dentist beyond the clinical side of things. And that's what our focus mainly is. And my main focus really with dentists, working with them, coaching them, mentoring them. And, even when you look at my content online, it's all about improving the non-clinical side of things that has been, so underdeveloped within dentistry, unfortunately. And it's created that disconnect many patients feel with their clinician. So they're interconnected. And then, of course, we don't want to use isolated tactics, right? We want to use a full plan to be as effective as possible and to get you to get from where you are to maybe even triple your income. And as I said, that's very much achievable. It's not rocket science. So looking back at the free course topics, you can ask yourself which one resonated most strongly with you and how do you see different elements connecting in your own practice. So we talked about the roadmap concept. It's a phased and very personalized action plan guiding you towards your goals. And it's very powerful because it gives you clarity, it gives you focus, and it structures your efforts and it holds you accountable. And we talk, again, much more depth in the full course on all these items and many more. And you can see it like a GPS for your career. You set the destination and then you plot the route and you start taking actions to reach the end result. So the question you can ask yourself is, how could having a structured roadmap provide more clarity and focus for your career development? And which one of these key components you feel needs the most attention in your current situation? Now, of course, there are deeper growth areas, and we laid this foundation in this free course. But there is a deeper strategy needed for the advanced financial analysis in terms of fee setting. You need to do some market analysis. You need to look at, some price differentiation strategies. And you need to also then look at like strategic marketing and branding, either personal branding or your practice branding. In terms of branding, what message do I want to give to the world? Is it a message of the most high-tech practice, or is it a message of a family practice, or maybe a specialized practice, or a practice where like people feel comfortable and like home, basically? So you can define your brand message, and everything needs to be consistent when you deal with any marketing efforts. So, your typography needs to be accurate, your logo needs to be accurate, the colors, the way you present your practice on the website, online, the way you present your practice in real life, how the uniforms are selected, the current ambience in the practice. So all of these elements need to communicate with the patient your brand message, your brand visual, and your brand identity. And I think that's an element, unfortunately, many practices lack. Then we talk about contract negotiation and the different practice models on how associate dentists and practice owners can practice dentistry in different parts of the world. And we really dive deep into ways of getting better negotiation skills and better to be able to negotiate a better deal with a practice owner if you're an associate dentist. So then there are, of course, advanced efficiencies and technological choices that you can make, and we go in deeper. We also talk about niche development and specialization and what impact that has on your income, and we kind of highlight a path towards that in your own kind of personalized way. We introduce detailed KPI systems. And of course, we kind of look at the full roadmap construction together with you. Now, which one of these deeper growth areas feels most critical for your next stage of development? That depends, of course, on which stage of your dental career you are. And how does mastering these advanced topics build upon the foundation from this free course? You can ask yourself these questions and look at whether it makes sense to go deeper or not. So when we look at implementation of the steps, if you don't have action and if all you have is a plan, in fact, it's just like an idea or a dream or an aspiration, and it stays there. You don't, if you don't action it, it simply stays where it is, and you won't get anywhere other than having nice, beautiful dreams of earning more and living more fulfilled professional lives. So the challenge for you really is to try and translate knowledge into action, and to try and do that consistently. And part of that is, of course, tracking your KPIs and looking at the data and reviewing the data. And that's a very, very important part of your journey as a dentist if you want to really be serious about earning more, increasing your income. And at times you need to adapt the plan, as we said before, because you may think a certain direction will give you the outcome you wanted, but then after a month or 2 months, you look back and say, this isn't the right direction. And you can either give up fully, or you can actually change direction and go in the right direction for you, for your personal circumstances. So each one of us had barriers, and some of you still have barriers when you want to try implement new strategies. Identifying those barriers is very important, and you need to always monitor your progress and monitor how you can achieve better results by always scrutinizing your work and how you spend your time in the practice. So key takeaways, you can implement them, and as long as you, I think, commit to certain steps, you can get somewhere. You don't necessarily have to do the full course. I mean, you're more than welcome to do the full course, but you can start by implementing these small changes here and there. And I think the small changes will potentially give you, a lot of improvement, along the way, right? Don't expect immediate results, but if you're serious about implementing improvements, you will see some improvements by implementing the tools that we gave you during this free course. You want to review your notes and any reflections from the 5 lectures. And if you want to dive deeper, you let us know and we can have a chat and we can see where we can help you. Of course, there is great value in the mentorship program and being part of a community where dentists share their successes, and that will kind of show you that you're not alone, right? I know dentistry can be quite lonely. We work as sole practitioners, but we are part of a community, and the community is full of people who share the same struggles. In fact, I share with you the same struggles. I had many of the struggles, but fortunately enough, I kind of was able to move away from them, implementing not all, but actually most of the things that I teach in the full course, in the 10K to 30K course. And I, by no means, am I saying that you should stop at 30K, right? You should definitely try to get a multiple of that. These are the reflections that you can take away, and you can take proactive control, right? I believe every person, every one of us has the power to shape their career trajectory. All you have to do is just commit to one action, right? Don't try to do everything at all in one go, right? Just choose one specific action that you want to take and implement it next week. And then once you've started implementing, you may want to share your idea and what you're implementing with a colleague, a mentor, or a friend, because that helps you stay accountable. And these are the points of reflection. And we've come to the end of the free course. Yes, the future is yours to create. And if in 10 years' time you had the opportunity to triple your income and you didn't, and while doing so you live a more satisfied professional and private life, then that's a big missed opportunity. And we can blame all kinds of factors, but eventually the decision really to bring about change in our circumstances is a decision only we can make, and we can't blame any other person for inaction. And whether you go for the full course with us or you go your own path, it doesn't really matter. You choose what matters most to you and what you feel comfortable with. And I'm hoping that you fulfill all your desires in this life, or as many as you can, in a good way. And yeah, I'm hoping to see you, and keep following us on YouTube, on Instagram, because we will be developing and coming out with more courses for dentists, and there will be a course for dental practice owners as well. And if you have any idea, any need for something that we don't cover, you let us know, and I'm sure we will put it on the list, on the to-do list to deliver it to you. All the best, and looking forward to see you soon.